In the cold, unforgiving lands of Scandinavia during the late 8th century, a child was born who would forever change the course of history. His name was Ragnar, though he would later earn the fearsome nickname Lothbrok, meaning shaggy britches. But who was the real Ragnar? Was he a single historical figure, or a composite of many Viking warriors whose deeds became intertwined in legend? The truth remains shrouded in mystery, where history and mythology blend so completely that separating fact from fiction becomes nearly impossible. What we know of Ragnar comes primarily from sources written centuries after his death. The saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, the tale of Ragnar's sons, and the writings of the 12th century Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus all tell his story, but with significant variations. Modern historians debate whether Ragnar was a real person at all, or perhaps several different Viking chieftains whose stories merged over time. What's certain is that by the medieval period, Ragnar Lothbrok had become the archetypal Viking hero, embodying everything the Norse culture valued: courage, cunning, ambition, and an unquenchable thirst for glory. According to the sagas, Ragnar was born into nobility, supposedly the son of the Swedish king Sigurd Ring. He grew up in an age when the Norse gods still influenced every aspect of life, when a man's worth was measured by his deeds in battle and his cleverness and strategy. From his earliest years, Ragnar displayed an unusual combination of physical prowess and intellectual curiosity. Unlike many warriors who relied solely on brute force, young Ragnar studied tactics, learned from past expeditions, and developed revolutionary ideas about how Vikings could expand their reach far beyond Scandinavia. The Viking Age itself, spanning from 793 to 1066 AD, was a time of extraordinary expansion. These seafaring warriors ventured from their homelands to raid, trade, and settle across Europe, reaching as far as North America, the Byzantine Empire, and North Africa. Ragnar would become one of the most famous figures of this era, a man whose exploits would inspire generations of Vikings to push ever further into unknown waters. The story of how Ragnar earned his legendary nickname is one of the most captivating tales in Norse literature, blending romance, cunning, and the supernatural elements that Vikings believed influenced their lives. According to the saga, there lived a beautiful maiden named Thora, daughter of the Swedish Earl Harald. When Thora was young, her father gave her a small lindworm, a type of serpent, as a pet. Following Norse magical tradition, Thora placed the creature on a bed of gold, for it was believed that dragons and serpents grew in proportion to the treasure they guarded. The lindworm grew at an alarming rate, feeding on the gold's mystical power, eventually becoming so massive and venomous that it coiled itself around Thora's tower, preventing anyone from approaching the maiden. The serpent's breath was so poisonous it could kill a man from dozens of feet away, and its scales were harder than the finest armor forged by master smiths. Earl Harald, desperate to free his daughter from this terrible predicament, proclaimed that any man brave enough to slay the beast would win Thora's hand in marriage and receive substantial rewards. Many brave warriors, hungry for glory and attracted by Thora's legendary beauty, attempted the feat but all perished horribly, overcome by the serpent's toxic fumes long before they could get close enough to strike with sword or spear. Their bodies littered the approach to the tower, a grim warning to others who might try. When news of this seemingly impossible challenge reached Ragnar, he saw not just an opportunity for glory and marriage to a beautiful woman, but a puzzle that required intelligence rather than mere strength. This was characteristic of Ragnar's approach to problems throughout his life. While other warriors saw only obstacles, Ragnar saw opportunities for cleverness to triumph over brute force. Ragnar devised an ingenious plan that would become the stuff of legend and give him his famous name. He took rough animal hides and thick furs, boiling them for hours in pitch and tar until they became stiff, hardened, and waterproof. From these specially treated materials, he fashioned unique clothing, strange shaggy breeches and a cloak that covered his entire body from head to toe. The treated leather was thick enough to protect him from the serpent's poisonous breath and sharp enough to deflect its striking fangs. Before departing for Thora's tower, Ragnar rolled his bizarre garments in coarse sand and gravel, adding yet another protective layer to his improvised armor. When he finally approached the serpent, the creature immediately sensed the intruder and struck repeatedly with lightning speed, its fangs seeking to inject deadly venom. But the fangs couldn't penetrate the specially prepared clothing. Again and again the serpent struck, becoming increasingly frustrated and exhausted, while Ragnar remained unharmed beneath his protective layers. Protected by his ingenious armor, Ragnar was able to get close enough to thrust his spear with tremendous force through the one vulnerable spot in the serpent's defenses, piercing its heart and killing the beast instantly. The victory earned him not only a bride but also a name that would echo through the ages and across all of Scandinavia. Ragnar Lothbrok, Ragnar of the Shaggy Breeches. This tale, while likely mythological or heavily embellished, reveals important aspects of how Ragnar was perceived by his contemporaries and remembered by later generations. He wasn't simply a warrior of great physical strength, but a man who used his intellect and creativity to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. This combination of brains and brawn would become Ragnar's hallmark throughout his legendary career, setting him apart from countless other Viking warriors whose names have been lost to history. Ragnar and Thora married, and their union produced two sons, Eirik and Agnar, who would themselves become notable warriors and leaders. However, tragedy struck when Thora fell ill with a mysterious sickness and died young, leaving Ragnar a widower with two small children to raise. Ragnar's second great love introduces us to one of Viking legend's most fascinating figures, Lagertha, a woman who defied every convention of medieval gender roles to become a warrior of fearsome reputation. According to the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus writing in the 12th century, Lagertha was a skilled fighter who joined forces with other warriors to avenge the death of a Norwegian jarl. When this jarl's enemies invaded Sweden, Ragnar gathered forces to counterattack and push back the invaders. Among the defenders who rallied to his banner were several women warriors, and chief among them was Lagertha. She fought with such extraordinary courage and skill that she immediately caught Ragnar's attention on the blood-soaked battlefield. Saxo writes that she fought in the front ranks where the fighting was fiercest, her hair flying loose over her shoulders, battling with the ferocity of a Valkyrie, those divine warrior women who served Odin and chose which warriors would die in battle. In the chaos and carnage of battle, Lagertha distinguished herself by leading a decisive charge that broke through the enemy lines and secured victory for Ragnar's forces. Impressed by both her martial prowess and her striking beauty, Ragnar sought to court her after the battle's conclusion. But Lagertha was no ordinary woman to be easily won by flattery or gifts. She set a dangerous challenge for her would-be suitor, placing a bear and a vicious hound outside her home to guard her door. Any man who wished to marry her would first have to defeat these beasts in single combat. Ragnar, already famous throughout Scandinavia for his cunning and courage, killed both animals and won Lagertha's hand. Their marriage united two formidable warriors and produced 3 children. Together, Ragnar and Lagertha formed a powerful partnership, raiding and fighting side by side across Scandinavia, with Lagertha proving herself not just as a warrior but as a strategist and leader in her own right, commanding respect from even the most hardened Viking raiders who normally would never follow a woman into battle. However, their marriage was not destined to last forever. The sagas tell us that Ragnar eventually divorced Lagertha, though the exact reasons vary depending on which source you consult. Some accounts suggest that Ragnar's growing political ambitions required a more advantageous marriage alliance, while others hint at personal conflicts between two incredibly strong-willed individuals who couldn't reconcile their differences. Despite their separation, Lagertha remained loyal to Ragnar in her own way, never remarrying and maintaining her own lands and warriors. Years later, when Ragnar faced a devastating civil war against rival claimants and found himself desperately outnumbered, it was Lagertha who arrived unexpectedly with a fleet of 120 ships to turn the tide of battle decisively in his favor. She fought with the same devastating effectiveness that had first captured Ragnar's heart years before, helping him secure a crucial victory before returning to her own lands without asking for anything in return. Ragnar's third and most famous wife would be a Slog, whose arrival in his life reads like a fairy tale woven with Norse mysticism and prophecy. According to the saga, a Slog was the daughter of the legendary hero Sigurd the Dragon Slayer and the Valkyrie Brynhildr, making her a figure of both mortal and divine lineage with destiny written in her blood. After her famous parents' deaths, young Aslog was raised in secrecy by a poor peasant couple who disguised her noble blood and renamed her Kraka, meaning crow, to protect her from those who might harm the child of such renowned parents. One day, Ragnar's men were traveling through Norway when they encountered a young woman of extraordinary beauty despite her ragged peasant appearance and dirty face. Mesmerized by something inexplicable about her, they told Ragnar about this mysterious girl who seemed to possess an otherworldly quality that set her apart from common folk. Intrigued by their description, Ragnar sent for her, but with characteristic cunning decided to test her intelligence with a riddle. He commanded that she should come to him neither dressed nor undressed, neither hungry nor full, and neither alone nor in company. Aslog, who possessed not only beauty but also wisdom and magical abilities inherited from her divine mother, solved the riddle with ease and creativity. She arrived at Ragnar's hall clothed only in her own long hair and a fishing net. having taken a single bite of an onion so she was neither hungry nor full, and accompanied only by a dog so she was neither alone nor in human company. Ragnar, deeply impressed by her wit and intelligence, desired to marry her immediately. But a slog revealed her true noble identity and challenged him with a dire prophecy, warning that if they consummated their union too hastily, their first child would be born without bones, a terrible curse that would mark the child for life. Ragnar, overwhelmed by passion and desire, ignored her prophetic warning against his better judgment. The prophecy came true exactly as the slog had predicted when she gave birth to their first son, Ivar, who was born with a mysterious condition that left his legs completely useless, his bones like soft cartilage that couldn't support his weight. Despite this severe physical disability, Ivar would grow up to become one of the most feared and brilliantly strategic Viking commanders in all of history, known forever as Ivar the Boneless, proving that physical limitations meant nothing compared to an exceptional mind. A slog would bear Ragnar several more sons over the years, each destined for their own form of greatness that would shake the foundations of medieval Europe. After Ivar came Bjorn Ironside, who inherited his father's courage and would become famous for his daring raids across the Mediterranean Sea. Then came Hvitser, whose name meant white shirt, known for his fierce loyalty. Next was Sigurd's snake in eye, who bore a strange mark in his eye that resembled a serpent biting its own tail. The youngest son, Ugg, completed this remarkable brotherhood of warriors who would change European history forever. Ragnar Lothbrok's most famous and audacious military achievement was his spectacular raid on Paris, an event that would cement his legend forever and demonstrate the full extent of Viking ambition and capability. In 845 AD, according to detailed Frankish chronicles that recorded the event with shock and horror, a massive Viking fleet of approximately 120 ships carrying somewhere around 5,000 fierce warriors sailed boldly up the Seine River deep into the heart of Francia, penetrating further inland than any Viking force had dared before. While historical sources don't definitively name Ragnar as the leader of this expedition, later Norse sagas consistently attribute this spectacular raid to him, and many modern historians believe that if Ragnar Lothbrok was indeed a historical figure, this daring attack was almost certainly his finest hour and greatest triumph. The target was Paris itself, at that time a relatively modest but strategically crucial city located on the Isle de la Cite in the middle of the Seine River. The city was defended by strong walls and towers and served as a vitally important center of Frankish political power under King Charles the Bald, grandson of the legendary Emperor Charlemagne who had united much of Western Europe. For Vikings to strike directly at Paris was to attack the very heart of one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms, an act of almost unbelievable audacity that required not just raw courage but also sophisticated planning, logistics, and naval coordination on a scale rarely seen in the Viking Age. The boldness of the plan itself speaks volumes about Ragnar's character and his revolutionary approach to Viking warfare. The Viking fleet sailed up the Seine in March of 845, with the timing carefully and cleverly chosen to coincide with Easter Sunday when many of the Frankish nobles and their armed retainers would be dispersed across the kingdom for religious observances, leaving the defenses weakened. Ragnar's strategic genius was evident in every aspect of the campaign's planning and execution. Rather than simply raiding monasteries and villages along the river as other Viking forces had done, he aimed for the ultimate prize, forcing the King of Francia himself to pay tribute to avoid the complete destruction of his capital city. As the massive fleet approached Paris with dragon-headed prows cutting through the water, King Charles the Bald attempted to organize a defense despite being caught off guard. He divided his available army into two groups, positioning one force on each bank of the Seine, planning to trap the Vikings between them in a pincer movement and destroy the raiders far from home. But Ragnar, demonstrating the tactical acumen and battlefield instincts that made him legendary, immediately identified the weakness in this defensive strategy. He struck the smaller and less experienced force on the northern bank with overwhelming and concentrated ferocity before the two Frankish armies could coordinate their movements. The Frankish soldiers, shocked by the Vikings' intensity, discipline, and terrifying battle fury, broke ranks and fled in panic. Ragnar then took 111 prisoners from the defeated force and, in a calculated act of psychological warfare, hanged them on a small island in the Seine in full view of the remaining Frankish army and the terrified citizens watching from the walls of Paris. This brutal act served multiple strategic purposes. It was a sacrifice to Odin, the god of war and death who demanded blood. It demoralized the enemy forces, and it demonstrated with horrifying clarity that the Vikings had complete and unchallengeable control of the river and the surrounding territory. The psychological impact was absolutely devastating to Frankish morale. The remaining Frankish forces, seeing their comrades brutally executed and lacking any confidence in their ability to defeat these ferocious Northmen in open battle, simply melted away into the countryside, abandoning Paris to its fate. The city lay completely exposed and vulnerable, its walls offering little protection against an enemy already inside their defensive perimeter. King Charles the Bald, facing the utterly unthinkable prospect of his capital being sacked and burned, his people massacred or enslaved, and his own throne threatened, made a decision that would have profound and lasting historical consequences for centuries to come. He agreed to pay the Vikings an absolutely staggering sum of 7,000 pounds of pure silver and gold in exchange for them leaving the city unmolested and sailing back down the Seine without causing destruction. This enormous payment, which became known as Danegeld meaning Danish money, or payment to the Danes, set an incredibly dangerous precedent that would haunt European kingdoms for generations. It proved beyond any doubt that Viking raids could be not just militarily successful but extraordinarily and reliably profitable, potentially more so than traditional warfare. Rather than risking casualties in a costly assault on the city walls, Ragnar shrewdly accepted the massive payment and sailed away triumphantly with his fleet laden with more treasure than most Vikings could accumulate in a lifetime of raiding. The Paris raid was an absolute watershed moment in Viking Age history. It demonstrated conclusively that no city in Western Europe was truly safe from Viking attack, no matter how far inland, how well defended, or how politically important. It showed that the Vikings had evolved from opportunistic coastal raiders into a sophisticated strategic force capable of launching deep penetration raids requiring complex logistics and conducting what amounted to state-level diplomacy and extortion. After the triumph at Paris, Ragnar's fame and wealth reached unprecedented heights. He returned to Scandinavia not just as a successful raider but as one of the most powerful men in the north. The massive amount of silver from the Danegeld allowed him to maintain a large personal army, commission new ships, and establish himself as a king in his own right. But with power came new challenges. Ragnar's growing influence threatened other Scandinavian rulers, and his own sons were becoming formidable warriors in their own right, eager to prove themselves and potentially challenge their father's supremacy. The dynamics within his family grew increasingly complex as Bjorn, Ivar, and the others reached manhood and began leading their own expeditions. Ragnar's attention increasingly turned toward England, a land divided into several competing kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex. These Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were wealthy, frequently at war with each other, and presented tempting targets for systematic conquest rather than simple raiding. Ragnar conducted multiple major campaigns into England throughout the 850s, sometimes leading massive fleets, sometimes working in coordination with other Viking leaders. Unlike earlier raids that focused on hit-and-run tactics, Ragnar began experimenting with establishing permanent bases, building fortifications, and extracting regular tribute from conquered territories. This represented an evolution in Viking strategy from pure raiding to actual territorial control and political domination. One of Ragnar's most significant English campaigns involved the Kingdom of Northumbria, where he exploited internal political conflicts to devastating effect. When rival claimants to the Northumbrian throne were locked in civil war, Ragnar saw opportunity. He allied temporarily with one faction, helping them defeat their enemies in exchange for tribute and land concessions. Once that was accomplished, he turned on his former allies, demonstrating the ruthless pragmatism that characterized his approach to warfare and politics. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records multiple devastating raids during this period that may have been led by Ragnar, describing how Viking armies would arrive suddenly, defeat local forces, extract enormous payments, and then either leave or establish winter camps to continue operations the following spring. Ragnar also conducted raids along the coasts of what is now France, Germany, and the Low Countries. The success at Paris had proven that major cities could be forced to pay rather than fight, and Ragnar applied this lesson repeatedly. Coastal towns and river settlements throughout Western Europe learned to dread the sight of Viking sails on the horizon. Monasteries, once easy targets, began building fortifications. Kings started constructing networks of fortified towns called buzz to provide refuge for their subjects. The entire defensive posture of Western Europe was being reshaped in response to the Viking threat that Ragnar embodied. Some historians believe Ragnar may have led expeditions as far as the Mediterranean, though evidence for this is less certain than for his northern European campaigns. Back in Scandinavia, Ragnar faced challenges from rival chieftains jealous of his success and wealth. According to some sagas, he fought several battles to maintain his position, including a significant conflict with a Swedish king who disputed Ragnar's territorial claims. These power struggles revealed the precarious nature of Viking leadership. where authority depended on continuous success in battle and the ability to reward followers with plunder and land. Ragnar also had to manage the ambitions of his own sons, particularly Ivar, whose brilliant tactical mind sometimes led to disagreements about strategy. Despite his physical limitations, Ivar had become arguably the most dangerous of Ragnar's sons, compensating for his inability to walk by developing an almost supernatural ability to predict enemy movements and devise devastating battle plans. As Ragnar entered his later years, the weight of age began to show despite his legendary status. The sagas tell us that Ragnar became increasingly concerned with his legacy and fearful that younger warriors would eclipse his fame. Vikings believed the only true immortality came through fame and having one's deeds remembered in songs and sagas. This fear of being forgotten drove Ragnar to plan one final glorious expedition that would remind the world why his name was spoken with such awe and terror. He decided to raid England once more, but this time with a much smaller force than his previous massive invasions. Some scholars interpret this as either overconfidence born from decades of success, or perhaps a death wish from a warrior who preferred to die in battle rather than succumb to old age and infirmity. Ragnar commissioned the construction of 2 ships for this final voyage, but fate intervened in the cruelest way. Whether through sabotage, incompetent craftsmanship, or simply bad luck, the ships were poorly constructed and fundamentally unseaworthy. His family pleaded with him not to go. His sons, now experienced warriors themselves, could see the expedition was doomed. Aslog, using her prophetic abilities inherited from her Valkyrie mother, had terrifying visions of Ragnar's death and begged him to abandon the voyage. She specifically warned him about the danger waiting in Northumbria. But Ragnar, driven by pride, stubbornness, and perhaps the Viking belief that fate could not be avoided, refused all counsel. He believed his reputation and the favor of the gods would protect him as they always had. The voyage was cursed from the moment the ships left Scandinavian waters. A massive storm, the kind Vikings attributed to the anger of the sea god Aegir and his wife Ran, struck the small fleet in the North Sea. The poorly built ships couldn't withstand the assault of mountainous waves and howling winds. Timbers cracked, sails ripped, and one by one the vessels broke apart. Most of Ragnar's warriors, weighed down by armor and weapons, drowned in the freezing waters, pulled under by the merciless sea. Ragnar himself survived only through a combination of luck and his still formidable strength, washing up on the Northumbrian coast more dead than alive, accompanied by just a handful of exhausted survivors. King El of Northumbria, who had suffered years of Viking raids and harbored deep hatred for the Northmen, quickly learned that a Viking force had been shipwrecked on his shores. When his soldiers captured the survivors and brought them before him, El recognized Ragnar Lothbrok despite his bedraggled appearance. The king faced a dilemma. He had captured the most famous Viking alive, the man whose raids had terrorized England for decades. Simply executing him would create a martyr and guarantee vengeance from Ragnar's sons, who were already famous warriors commanding their own armies. But releasing him or demanding ransom would make El look weak. After consultation with his advisors, King El decided on an execution that would serve as both punishment and warning to other Vikings. According to the saga, he had a deep pit prepared and filled it with venomous snakes collected from across the kingdom. Ragnar was thrown into this pit alive, and the serpents, disturbed and aggressive, struck him repeatedly. The venom began its agonizing work, and Ragnar faced a slow, painful death. But even in this horrible moment, Ragnar's legendary courage held. As the poison coursed through his veins, he sang his death song, a traditional Viking poem recounting his greatest victories and exploits. His voice rang out from the pit, strong and defiant even as death approached. Ragnar's final words became legendary and would change the course of English history. As he felt his life ebbing away, he proclaimed, "How the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers." This cryptic statement was clearly referring to his sons, and it was both a prediction and a warning. Ragnar knew that when news of his death reached Scandinavia, his sons would come seeking vengeance with a fury that England had never witnessed. True to his prediction, when Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Vitzer, Sigurd, and Ub learned of their father's fate, they were consumed by rage. In 865 AD, they assembled what became known as the Great Heathen Army, the largest Viking invasion force ever to attack England. This massive army, numbering in the thousands, landed in East Anglia and began a systematic conquest of England. They weren't coming to raid and leave, they were coming to conquer, settle, and avenge their father. Over the next several years they defeated kingdom after kingdom. They captured King El himself, and according to the sagas, executed him using the horrific blood eagle ritual, where the victim's ribs are cut from the spine and pulled outward to resemble eagle wings, their lungs pulled out. Whether this actually happened or was saga embellishment, King El paid dearly for killing Ragnar. The great heathen army would eventually control most of England, establishing the Danelaw, a region where Viking law and culture dominated for generations.